Hi, second graders. So, by now, we have read about four fairy tales. So, what I want us to spend today doing is to go over one more time what are the different components of a fairy tale. Now that we've read some, we should be able to identify them and talk about them. So, let's get started. The most important thing about a fairy tale is that they are a make believe story. A make believe story means that it's not real. Okay, one of the reasons that it's not real is because they almost always have magic or spells. And of course, we know magic and spells aren't aren't real, right? So there's no magic in real life. We don't have magic beans that grow beanstalks all the way up into the clouds. Okay, that's an example of something that's make believe. That's magic. If we think about Cinderella, there was a fairy godmother that can cast a spell. Okay? Another point in fairy tales is that they usually begin with once upon a time. That just means that it happened a while ago, that it happened a long time ago. It didn't happen recently. Okay, so that's a really good thing to know as a writer because now we know we can start our fairy tales once upon a time every time if you want. Another point is that they usually end happily ever after. I'm not sure if I know any fairy tales that don't have a happy ending. We can think back to Cinderella, right? Cinderella and her prince live happily ever after, married, and even Jack and the Beanstalk. He didn't end up married with anybody, but the giant, the bad guy, he went away, and Jack ended up perfect, right? Princess and the Pea. The prince and the princess ended up married. So many fairy tales end up with the prince and the princess together forever. Okay, so if you have a happy ending on your fairy tale, it's sure to be great. They also usually take place, so the setting of a fairy tale is in a castle or a forest. Think about Cinderella or the Princess and the Pea or the Frog Prince. All of those fairy tales take place with a princess who lived in a castle. And then if we think about Jack and the Beanstalk or Little Red Riding Hood, those are two examples of fairy tales where they happened in a forest. The setting was in a forest. Most of the time, when you read a fairy tale, you can tell the difference between good and evil. That's usually a theme of the stories is there's a good person and there's an evil person, and as the reader, we can tell in a snap who's good and who's evil. When we think about Jack and the Beanstalk, the giant, the giant was evil who lived at the top of the beanstalk. He was evil, and the good guy was Jack. And as a reader, we were rooting for Jack to get away safely, right? The one last thing I want to talk about is talking animals. Think about the princess and the pea, right? There was a talking frog who was under a magic spell. If We haven't read this yet, but I remember we read this way at the beginning of second grade about the wolf and the three little pigs. That big bad wolf has that really famous line where he says, I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down. Wolves don't talk in real life, right? That only happens in fairy tales and make believe stories. Okay, so not every single fairy tale has to have all of these components, but most of them have most of them. And when we go to write our own fairy tales, it's going to be a lot easier for us if we have a list next to us telling us what are in fairy tales. Okay? So, I'm not going to have you write anything today, but I have another video for you to watch where it's a read aloud of my favorite version of um, The Three Little Pigs. Okay, we actually did read it at the beginning of the year, the first day. So you might have already remember what happens, but if not, definitely give it a listen because it's my favorite version of this book and I think you'll really enjoy it.